So now let's work on refining the animation of Winslow. So there are a few areas here that I want to work on. One is for this first shot, and we'll sort of focus on it shot by shot. For the first part of this, I'd like to not have him completely still, right? And so maybe for this stretch through here, I would like to get in here and have him doing a little bit of like looking around at something. I'm not sure exactly what yet, but I'll probably import in something here. I don't know what it'll be. But that means I don't want this keyframe on 0 and this keyframe on 27 to be exactly the same. So I'm going to go ahead and change the one on 27, have him continuing to look around a little bit. Rotate this, translate it a little bit, right? So we get a little bit of movement here. But that sort of looking movement usually isn't very smooth, right? It's not like a really slow drift. It's usually little darts, right? Little shifts, little quick shifts. So I'm going to try to make this movement happen in like 3 quick shifts instead. So what I'll do is go up to say frame 2, middle mouse click, and drag out a little bit to here. And I want to hit S. So that means he kind of stays relatively still. And then I'm going to have him sort of shift over to about halfway through this really quick, like maybe over at 2 frames. So I middle mouse clicked again to sort of borrow those keyframes. So let's see what that's feeling like. There we go. And so now I can borrow a little bit more of this out to here. So again, like maybe go out to say frame 18, middle mouse click, drag that to like 24, hit S. And so now this motion should look like these tiny little looks around, right? In fact, I'm going to go ahead and hit S there and have those happen a little bit earlier. So I get these. Yeah, and I'm going to maybe change those just a little bit, right? Maybe it looks to there, maybe here on this one I'll have him look back the other direction. Maybe a little bit of rotation here. And then I can take that key and just copy it to there. Yeah, so we're getting this like so I don't want this one to be completely 100% this pose. So what I may do is go ahead and delete frame 21. That way I can have like most of frame 21. Middle mouse click and drag that back. So we get this like. Now this head turn here is the second thing I want to work on. Right now it's very like this is just a weird transition, right? And so I want to think about how he might swing his head around. And so that means right now Maya is making decisions for me here in the middle, and I want to be the one making the decision, right? So if I use that greater than less than key, I can step from here to here, right? And think about how I want him to go from those 2 poses, right? And if I look at the middle of this, that's not really it. Like it's kind of not a very attractive pose, not a very interesting pose. Instead, I'm going to go ahead and grab Winston, go ahead and set a keyframe in the middle. I'm going to try to make a pose in the middle to guide how I want this transition to happen. So I want his head to kind of lead it with his chest, but I also want to drag his head back and maybe have his eye already starting to look up a little bit, right? So a little bit maybe of something like this. And so now I have this extra key in the middle, and it looks like this. And so if we watch that, that's just a little bit more interesting of a motion, right? I also feel like that control's kind of off a bit. We fix that. There we go. And so now if I watch that play out, okay. So what I did there is I sort of dragged the head so it could catch up. Now again, we get to this pose here and it's completely still, and so I maybe don't want it to be completely still. Maybe I want to continue it on just a little bit. We call this a moving hold, where the character is for the most part in the same pose, but it's not completely dead, right? And so maybe I'd do a little bit more like that. That's what that looks like. Yeah, there we go. So even though my character is going from this pose to this pose pretty quickly, that maybe is a little too much, right? Like it's just too blendy. Right? I blend from pose A to pose B. So I'm gonna do an extra pose in here. Click Winslow, go ahead and hit S. And I'm gonna do just a little bit of an anticipation pose. So I'm gonna go back to here. Right? And that way I can make this pose a little bit more of a dip into this, like a little bit of a squash. And I make something like that. I'm going to squash the neck and head down just a little bit as well. Huh, it's kind of funny. So I don't want it to lean back too much. Maybe like this. And the other thing I want to do is go ahead and blank this eye. Now, I haven't really been doing very much with the antenna. I can be posing them. I could put them in a pose. But there's also something to be said with sort of using these like an extremity, like a cloth or a tail or something like that, to where I can go back and do a pass on them later. What I will say is, like, sometimes people do that with characters' fingers, and that doesn't work as well. But for something like this, maybe this will I'll give it a little bit of posing to my camera here. Same with his ears, right? The anticipation. And what I can do that now is that when we hit this stretch, I can have the opposite happening. Right? Stretch him back and get this eye looking a little bit more in this direction. Right? But I can also now grab these antennae, do something like this. And even though for the most part these are built to be rotated, I can translate them out just a little bit as well. There we go. And if I'm not mistaken, I think I can even scale them a little bit. I'm also going to go ahead and do something a little bit more exaggerated with his ears. Okay. So that's a pretty good pose, right? So I'm going to save that pose and go ahead and hit S. And what I'd like to do is this is a little animation trick that you can use, which is I would like to make this almost vibrate, right? So I'm going to select this character. This pose here, I want to push it just a little bit more, the second pose. So I'm going to go ahead and continue to push that upward. Now, right now it's in world view, so I can just sort of push them up like that, maybe even stretch them out a little bit more, even saturate this a little bit more, right? But what I have is this like slow creep up, right? And if I were to go in here and just set a keyframe on every frame of this, so this is a little bit of a cartoony trick, I guess. I'm just going to select the entire character, and every keyframe I'm just going to go ahead and hit S. Right? Now, nothing really changes in that animation now. But what I can do is sort of offset these a little bit. So instead of going from frame 53 to 54 to 55, if I just swapped where 55 and 54 are, then I can get like a vibration going on. So let's zoom in here really close and see if we can do something with this. I can show you how to do this in the graph editor pretty easily as well. Right? We got 54, 55. So what I'm going to do just to make this a little easier on myself, and I just got to try to keep track of it. I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to move frame 54 over to here. And then I can move 55 back to here, and then the one from there back to here. And what you'll see is this jump back, right? And then it goes up again, and then that's the one I'm going to move back to here. Here. So I'm just kind of swapping them out. So 58 is where I'm at right now. Let me see if there's another way that we could try this, and this may or may not work. We're going to use the dope sheet. So the dope sheet is where we can keep track of all the keyframes, right? And so this is the keyframes on everything. And if I just minimize the dope sheet summary here, I think I can, yeah, we could do it in the dope sheet, but I think it's going to be a little more complicated. So let's just keep doing it the way we're doing it. So we go 53 goes up and then back down, up, and then back down, up, up. So that means I need to take 58 back to here, 59 to there, and bring that back. And really what I'm doing is I'm just reversing each of them. So I'll just continue to do this process. 60. And I think we'll leave those as two. And so what this should look like now, there we go, is I'm being pretty scared, right? All right. So now with that worked out, let's continue on the animation. There we go. And so we'll see what we have so far. Okay. So most of the rest of this now is my run. And so I'm going to go ahead and switch to camera 2 because this is where we see it mostly from. And I'm going to have a lot of poses I need to just kind of clean up in here. Yeah. So these are not all the poses I need. These are just the poses I was doing for layout. So let's try to get a prettier pose for my run. So what I'm looking at it here, that's just not a very pretty pose. I'm going to move this over, twist this on around, twist this on around. There we go. And I think part of what's happening here is this neck. That's some translations on it. There we go. And instead of getting those out of the neck, think I need to be getting that. There we go. And then the eye this way. Now I'm going to lean him in just a little bit. I'm also going to rotate this head back. So this is our squash pose. And I kind of like that pose. I want to turn his head just a little bit to camera so we can see it a little bit better. And that's a pretty good squash pose. So very similarly, I'm going to kind of use that pose again here. And so I just go ahead and little mouse drag that to here, hit S, and then I can then make sure I'm putting them in the right spot. So we gotta kind of working this motion. Okay. And I'm actually going to go ahead and I'm going to kill these up poses. I'm just going to delete them. So Winslow, so I think 75 is an up pose. That one's an up pose. And then it kind of holds it there for a second. And then, yeah, that's right. And I'm just doing that just so I can basically have better pose here. So we're grabbing this top box and this box. And it'll be about here. I'll probably change it just a touch, just so he's facing the ship a little bit better. And then one's hit S, copy that pose. And so now he doesn't have the up poses, he just has the hit poses. And then that's pretty good. Let's see. Actually, I really kind of like that pose. I'll probably do a little bit more of how he lands in here. So I'll probably do this up a little bit, roll it forward. So I'm basically adding an additional pose in here. Goes up this way, and that'll allow me to land him in a way that takes him into the cart a little bit better. There we go. And this needed to be a full pose. Winslow, let's see what that looks like. Jump. Still another little extra pose I'll need in there. Okay, so all of these are our squash poses now. Squash, 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 squash. So I push that squash a little lower. And then this is a stretch in the middle here. That again, I like that pose, but I think I'm going to change it just a little bit and do something like this. Here we go. Maybe made it worse. Let's try to fix this a little bit better. Yeah. There we go. And so we got this stretch pose and then him kind of rolling into it. So pretty much all this stuff here is just kind of compressing him into the compartment, right? Okay. So we got our squash poses. So now I need my up pose in between each of these. And so I deleted those poses just so it's a little easier for us to create our up pose. So I can hit Winslow. And so I recognize now this is this pose, this is this pose. About halfway between, we're getting a little bit of stuff for free there. And so I can hit S and then go ahead and raise him up in the air and get a good like up in the air pose. And for that, I want to have it kind of kick him back. This isn't necessarily the stretch pose. This is the peak of his jump, right? And so maybe this part does need to be a little bit like this.
Right.
Okay. So Winslow, and the S on that, make sure there's a key on everything. And then again, halfway through this, we're in another up in the air pose. I can even change this one if I wanted to. It doesn't have to be the same type of pose. Notes it like this, like he's a little more terrified. Oh, look at that. Maybe even drag the head back a little bit. So he gets one jump, a different jump, and then he dives in. There we go. That's cool. So we got, again, with all of these, we got our squash pose, we got our up in the air pose, and so now we need our two contact poses. So for this jump, if we're going from squashed, that means in like 2 frames, I want it to be in a stretch pose. So I kind of need to stretch pose as he's coming back down here as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get this control here, and just the bottom control. And I'm going to middle mouse drag back 2 frames. And so what that's going to do is let that part hit the ground first, and then I can kind of control how he comes back down. So like this. Okay. Winslow and hit X. And so you'll see now he contacts kind of stretched out and then squashes down. All right. So my stretch pose needs to come maybe like 2 frames after this one. So I'm going to select everything on Winslow, middle mouse, drag out by about 2 frames. But I'm doing that to keep him stuck to the ground so I can then craft a stretch pose. Right? So he's pushing off the ground there. I'm going to try to stretch toward where I'm jumping. There we go. So we got this contact, stretch, up in the air. And that means about 2 frames before we hit the ground. I'm going to go ahead and key everything on this one. So that means about 2 frames before we hit the ground, we need another stretch. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this one. Again, middle mouse click, drag back 2 frames, hit S. Okay. So basically what I did is I copied my ground pose there. And then and I did that so my feet would stay on the ground so I can create a stretch pose now. Now again, what this looks like is your call. I'm going to aim forward a little bit like this. How does that look? It's pretty good. And so now I can continue to alter, squash him a little bit more on my squash there. And on this pose here, there's just something about this one doesn't look right. Yeah, I think it's his head. It's always his head. Move this eye forward. Okay, it's looking good. Now we got her up in the air pose there. So we got, let's look at these again. We got, he's coming back down from the ground. We got a stretch pose, squash, stretch, up in the air, stretch, squash. Sometimes we need another stretch to follow this to push him off the ground. So again, select everything on Winslow. I move forward 2 frames and hit S. And then I'm going to stretch him again. Get another interesting pose here. Yeah. Again, we're just trying to make we're trying to make this fun. Right? Enjoyable to watch. Now, one of the reasons I animate from my perspective view, one is it's kind of far away right now, right? But this will let me like tumble around and see the pose from every side, because you never know. You may be working from one angle, and next thing you know, the character, he looks about the same in the viewport here, right? But here, he looks like this. And so we want to, just for consistency, it helps us a lot if we can kind of keep track of what he is really doing. Squash stretch up in the air. Need another stretch before he hits the ground here. Yeah. Let's make sure we keyed everything on this one. So right before he hits the ground here, I'm going to go back about 2 frames and hit S. Can make my stretch pose for this one. See if I can So I think I need to take this one higher up in the air. Anyone else? And then we can squash. And since he holds this squash a little longer, I want him to squash into it, but maybe not be all the way forward yet. And then go even deeper on this squash, push this head even lower, push the neck even lower. That I'm messing some stuff up there. Try to get that a little bit better. Right? Really squash him into that one. And that way when he jumps there, it'll be more exaggerated. So with this pose here, select everything, want to pull forward about 2 frames, S, and then this is where I can stretch him out. And stretch him toward his jump. And stretch out his head a little bit as well. Actually, let's do this. I'm going to select the head control and the neck control and 0 those out to see where it should be. So stretch it even more. There we go. So what's that look like? There we go. Squash, jump. Not sure what's happening with that controls. I think the head is doing something weird there. How's it here? Oh, that's where it's rolling forward. Okay, well, let's watch that now. There we go. So, the last thing on Winslow we need to look at is that once he gets in here and the ship takes off, he's still just sitting there. Right? And you'll see I've wadded him up into the ball here. He's not in great shape. So there's a couple things we could do here. One, we could try to animate Winslow staying in the ship or do some sort of constraint so he stays within the ship. Another thing you can do is just sort of animate him through the ground or something like that over a single frame. So if I go in here and look at Winslow, he is here on frame 135 and on frame 136. I can just have him underground, right? And so now he's no longer in the ship, right? Sometimes you can see some of that happening in the motion blur though. So what I think I'm actually going to do is go find his mesh. So let's go back to where I can see him really well. Right. 6. And you'll see under here we got Winslow mesh. That's just his mesh. So if I uncheck that and I right click on Winslow mesh and say select objects. So now I have all of Winslow's mesh selected. And what I can do is say around frame 115, I can just set a keyframe on the visibility. So I'm going to right click on the visibility and say key selected, it's on. And then on frame 116, type in 0, it's off, make sure key selected that. And so what really just happens is he becomes invisible over a single frame. You see him there, now you can't, right? And so hopefully now he will no longer be visible in that floating in the air once the ship takes off. Now there's still some stuff I want to edit on Winslow's animation, but we're going to kind of hold off a little bit until we get some of the other animation in better shape.